Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Metabolism and Menopause podcast. My name is Stephanie, and I am your host and CEO of VitalityOET. We are a women's nutrition, health, and fitness company that focuses predominantly on women's hormones, particularly as they start going through perimenopause and onwards. We know that you start experiencing so many changes in this time of your life, whether it be hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, brain fog, or that waking around the middle that seems to have come out of absolutely nowhere, despite you not changing anything. So you go back to those tried and true methods of cutting calories, cutting carbs, doing a bunch of cardio, yet nothing seems to be working. You're putting in all this effort and it feels like you're moving backwards. But we know now that your body is inherently different now that you've gone through these hormonal changes. So our mission here at Vitality is to help you really understand how your body changes in this time of your life so you can reach those health and fitness goals, live a life full of vitality, feel in control and at home in your body again, and really understand how to take care of this new body of yours. So today I have the wonderful Coach Kirianna on the podcast, and we get questions about hormone testing all the time. So today, together, we wanted to really go over all the different ways that you can actually test your hormones. What are the pros of each test? What are the cons of each test? And of course, what should you be testing in perimenopause and menopause and why? So we're going to go through so many things. So first, we're going to start with what kind of testing is done for our sex hormones. And there are three main ways that we can really test our hormonal levels. And this is through blood or serum testing, through saliva testing, or urine metabolite testing. So we're going to talk about all of those for you today. And the one that you're probably most commonly known or like that you've done is the blood serum testing. So these are just regular blood draws. They can assess the levels of estrogen, progesterone, LH, FSH. However, if you're still menstruating, it's really important to note that it is essential to understand where a patient is at in their cycle to properly interpret those results. Because depending where you are in your cycle, obviously your hormones are going to fluctuate. So this is really important. You need to know where you are. So we're going to see that estradiol and FSH are often tested on day 3 of your menstrual cycle, whereas LH may be tested during the ovulation window. So that's anywhere from days 13 to 15. Estradiol may also be tested in the ovulation window, as high estrogens may inhibit that ovulation that we're looking for. To see peak progesterone levels, a blood test would have to be administered during post-ovulation in that luteal phase, usually around days like 19 to 22. And that's assuming an average 28-day cycle, which is not typical in perimenopause, right? So it can be a lot of different tests and timelines in order to really properly assess all your hormones that you actually want to test. So it can be helpful to evaluate estrogen levels in the post-ovulation window as well, particularly in cases of suspected hormonal imbalances due to that excess estrogen. So this is where you really need to understand these things. This is why you might hear doctors be like, oh, there's no point in testing your hormones because they fluctuate so much. And this is like kind of why, which again is like frustrating because you still should be able to understand what your levels are. Right? So one of the pros about the blood testing is that you can typically get it through your doctor and insurance will typically cover it. But again, you're still going to get doctors who are like, it's not really a point. It's not a good use of our time, a good use of our resources because of like how you should be, what windows you want to be testing in. And if you test in one window, you're not getting good answers for some hormones and vice versa. So, Kirianna, I will let you take it away with like, what are some other drawbacks when it comes to blood testing for hormones?
Okay, so when it comes to some drawbacks for serum testing, there are actually quite a few. The first one is that hormones in menopause are, first of all, different, right? So we're looking at different levels of hormones, but we're not only looking at those different levels of hormones, we're looking at sometimes different hormones. So for instance, estrogen, which is our estradiol E2 in reproductive years, that's mainly what they test. However, when we are in menopause, our body switches to estrone production, but they don't really test that in our blood, right? And so basically one main limitation of this is that most conventional serum blood testing is designed for reproductive years and not necessarily for postmenopause, which is really difficult because when you're in postmenopause and you're experiencing all these really, not fun symptoms, and you go get all these reproductive, designed for reproductive years hormones tested, and they don't really tell us much. There's not really much that you can do with that, right? The other, some other drawbacks that we have is that many hormones fluctuate in your blood throughout the day. So no matter what stage of life you're in, a one-time serum test is simply a snapshot of what's happening at that exact time. And it doesn't take into account those fluctuating hormones throughout the day, which estrogen and progesterone especially, but most hormones will fluctuate throughout the day, and they're supposed to. So for example, if you're going to test cortisol with your blood, those cortisol levels should spike in the morning. They should be going down in the afternoon at night. But estrogen and progesterone levels also fluctuate with those cortisol levels. So taking a test maybe in the morning, randomly, maybe 4 or 5 hours after you wake up, may not be giving us accurate results for a whole day moving average or a snapshot of those fluctuating hormones. And it also, like when you go to get your blood done, it doesn't necessarily follow the right curves of your day. So let's say, for example, you're getting like a Dutch test or something, they ask you to test at very specific time. So like right when you wake up, 2 hours after you wake up, in the afternoon at a specific time, like that kind of thing, right? So we can't really do that. It's a little bit less controllable when it comes to blood testing because we are kind of, even if we're doing fasted testing, like we're at the mercy of the lab people and we're at the mercy of going in to get it done. Another drawback is that for sex hormones, there's actually no distinction in serum testing between bound and unbound hormones. So in the body, a lot of tissues can actually store or bind hormones, and we actually aren't able to see that in our blood. Blood obviously only tests free hormones. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could just be kind of misleading. For some people, hormone levels in your blood will appear normal or even high because of the amount of maybe these free hormones versus the bound hormones. And we kind of want to see both. We kind of want to be looking at our pathways. For example, we do see this frequently with some cortisol testing where it will test really high when you go to get it done in like your blood. So like serum testing, maybe at like randomly 10 o'clock in the morning or something. But then when we take something like a Dutch test that measures it over a 24-hour period and we actually can look at your curve and we can look at the way that your cortisol is being metabolized, we can see that the high cortisol reading might actually be a false positive. We see this a lot actually. So your free cortisol is really high, but your metabolized cortisol and your total cortisol production ends up being really low because for some reason your cortisol metabolism is actually hindered. So it's not because we're producing too much cortisol that we're seeing this free cortisol really high. It's actually because we're not actually detoxing it fast enough. And now it's like building up. It's almost like this bathtub that's going to overflow on us because the drain is clogged, right? So we kind of, we have to approach even nutrition and like the way that we do the de-stressing and lifestyle changes, we have to approach those two things very differently. And if we're only getting a face value answer from a blood test, like we're not actually maybe seeing the whole picture or seeing the root cause as to why our free cortisol might be looking really high. And is it a false positive? Is it like accurate? We don't actually really know. One other thing that we see as a drawback to serum testing sometimes is that you need a doctor to order the tests most of the time for most of us. And a lot of them, a lot of us seem to, when we go to the doctors, we talk about this stuff, you talk about this a lot, we seem to hit a lot of red tape. We seem to hit some walls with our provider's willingness to treat or test these hormones, which can be really frustrating because, it's our right to kind of know what's going on in our body. And there's always a lot of red tape for some of these tests or just dealing with some doctors that are not willing to test these things in order to get some answers as to maybe what is potentially going on in your system.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like the big thing too is like with the blood testing, like you mentioned, it's like it only tests a moment in time and it only tests what's actually circulating in your blood. And like when we look at cortisol, for example, the percentage of cortisol in your bloodstream versus like in tissue and in metabolized is very different. So we're only getting like a fraction of what the full picture looks like. And we're just assuming that there's a lot of cortisol based on like the free cortisol in your bloodstream, when really that might not be the case. And again, we see this so much. And like for myself, like I did a test, my cortisol was high for a long time in the day, did not come down where it should have back when I took it. And like, but if I would have taken it in the morning, it would have been in the normal range because it's supposed to be higher in the morning. But if I would have went in the afternoon and it was still high, then that would have been flagged as an issue. So it's really understanding like how patterns change throughout the day Is it because things are building up? Is it because you're not detoxing? Are you producing too much? Are you actually producing too little? We don't get to see the why when we look at blood testing. So that's blood testing. The next one is salivary testing. Some women get this done. I don't see this quite as often, but some hormones can be tested using a saliva sample, which is often a lot more convenient, less invasive than having to get blood work all the time. Saliva testing for female hormones has been shown to be accurate in evaluating both estrogen and our progesterone levels. This test also includes a morning cortisol marker, which is the hormone most responsible for our stress response. However, many saliva tests don't test throughout the day to give us an accurate picture of that cortisol pattern. So similar to blood work, if I'm only testing in the morning, we have people who their pattern is normal, and then at nighttime we're seeing this huge spike, and that's what's waking them up and they can't sleep well and things like that. So saliva testing is considered a little more inaccurate than urine testing. It won't show us any pathways of hormone metabolism or breakdown. So we don't know if, the bathtub's filling up too quickly. Is it not draining quick enough? Things like that. And salivary levels of hormones also fluctuate throughout the day. So it's important to do a salivary test that has 3 or 5 readings that you can take. It also can't test things like thyroid or secondary androgens or other really important hormones or metabolites in the pathways that will give us, again, a nice, bigger, full picture as to what's going on in your body.
Okay, so last one that we're going to talk about, these are kind of like the 3 main ways that you can pretty easily get any kind of hormones tested, is urine metabolite testing. And so we are going to be talking about the Dutch test for this because it is kind of the most common urine metabolite test. That is the test that we can actually administer as well. So it's the one that we use the most. But we use Dutch testing, so this Dutch urine metabolite testing. For some women that want it at Vitality, it is a urine metabolite test, as I said, taken 4 or 5 times throughout the day. And urine metabolite testing is considered the gold standard of testing the most hormones and the most pathways as accurately as possible in one place. Now, again, to say there's no perfect test. However, this one is considered, kind of a gold standard for the majority of the things that we might want to be looking at kind of going on in the body. The Dutch test is a comprehensive diagnostic tool that allows for a thorough evaluation of our client's hormonal balances, our client's hormonal function. This test is specifically designed to assess the levels of hormones and their metabolites in the body. So it can actually provide us some really valuable insights into any kind of hormonal imbalances, potential underlying health issues that might be coming up that hey, we need to go to your doctor and try to get this tested so we can cross it off the list. We're seeing some signs. And it can help us identify, deficiencies, excesses of hormones, irregularities in your hormone cycle or your cortisol cycle that may be contributing to symptoms like these perimenopausal and postmenopausal symptoms we see so commonly in women, like mood swings, fatigue, weight gain or weight loss resistance, any kind of perimenopausal issues like hot flashes, night sweats, all of the stuff that we don't want to be having to go through on a consistent basis. So other things specifically that the Dutch test or any kind of most urine metabolite test can tell you are, first of all, hormone levels. So we measure levels of hormones like cortisol, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, but not only those, things like all 3 of your estrogen types. So estrone, which is your menopausal estrogen. It also looks at other secondary androgens that you might not be able to get tested in your blood, like etioclanolone, or a lot of people have heard of DHT. Those are really important things to assess, especially postmenopause, because we can see a lot of androgen dominance in postmenopause as we lose those levels of estrogen and progesterone. The nice thing is that the Dutch test actually also gives us menopausal ranges for those sex hormones that are supposed to be tested in postmenopause. We can look at, okay, well, are we on the higher or lower end of the menopausal range for those hormones, right? It helps us measure things like DHEA, DHEA-S. Those are all really important aspects of, up the chain type of hormones too, that we'll touch on kind of after the testing here in a second. Other things that the Dutch test will tell us are hormone metabolites. So it also helps us measure those metabolites, which can provide information about how well your body is actually metabolizing and recycling and eliminating hormones. This can be really useful for identifying issues like sometimes estrogen dominance, because we're actually just not detoxing it properly. It's not that we're producing too much, right? Just like that example I gave a little bit earlier, your cortisol metabolism can actually give us false high readings. So looking at the metabolite pathways and how your body's actually metabolizing it is so important to identify and be able to address those, because it gets us closer to the root cause of things. Another thing the Dutch test can look at, or a urine metabolite can sometimes look at, some of them, other than the Dutch test, don't provide these specific things, but more oxidative stress markers. So Dutch testing will measure markers of oxidative stress, which can be inflammation signs, oxidative damage in the body. These things are really important to know, because if we're dealing with a lot of inflammation in the body, we need to actually know how to address them properly. And then another really cool thing it can identify, among other things, is neurotransmitter metabolites. So Dutch can also measure metabolites of these neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, which can provide really good insight into issues like depression or anxiety, or for us with the nutrition coaching, if we have like these low dopamine markers, it can actually affect the way that we sleep, our anxiety, but also like intense cravings. It can explain sometimes why we get these huge cravings. It can also sometimes explain why we are like binge eating, because it does have like the low dopamine can be associated with those like, binge eating or craving behaviors. So it can give us a lot of answers and a lot of insight, and sometimes give, our clients a little bit of comfort, like, hey, this is what's going on inside my body. Now I know how to actually deal with it.
Exactly. And I think like the more information you have, it makes you feel so much better, because you understand, like, you're not broken. It's not a lack of willpower. Like, there's things going on in your body, and then we can make a plan to actually like address those things, which is super important. There are, of course, going to be some drawbacks to Dutch testing, just like there is with all tests. The thing is that it does not give you any thyroid testing directly. This can only be done with blood work. However, the Dutch test can give us some really important indications of potential thyroid health, which can then prompt us to have our clients talk to their doctors and their medical providers and ask for additional testing confirmation. Another drawback is that for some, price for this test isn't going to be covered by some insurance plans. So the cost would be out of pocket as well, which sucks. But there are some insurance plans that do. So you just got to like dig into that a little bit. It is also going to be dependent on client accuracy. So this is a really big one. If you don't follow the rules of the test, you can get some inaccurate readings. So for example, like, I think avocado is one of the things that you can't have for like 2 days before you do your Dutch test. Paying attention to caffeine, paying attention to the times that you do it, making sure you're putting in like any medications that you're on. If you're being off of some of them when you can for a few days, to make sure we're like not having those show up in our readings. So you do have to make sure that you are reading those. And as coaches, the test gives us information on key hormones like cortisol, our primary stress hormone, which is going to help us evaluate the body's stress response and assess their adrenal gland function as well. We're going to pair this with like your current symptoms. We do a hormonal symptom assessment with everyone who comes in as well, or anyone who purchases the Dutch test with us. And that helps us get more insight about how your body is running, because numbers without any like explanation or description really don't mean anything. Because you could have two people come in, same height, same weight, maybe they're both 5'5" and 160 pounds, and that's all the data you have. We don't know anything. Like, there's people who are 5'5" and 160 pounds and they are fit, super healthy, super muscular. Then you can have someone who's 5'5" and 160 pounds and they don't have a lot of muscle mass and their body fat percentage is really high. So we need context as to what are your symptoms? How are you feeling? How is your energy? How is your sleep? Because all these things paired with the numbers are important. When people just want us to read lab work, I'm like, that's not enough. Like, we don't like doing that. We want to go through some assessments and really see what do these equate to? Like, what are the results showing us based on how you're feeling? So it gives us way more insight that way as to how your body is actually running. It gives us more power to create proper nutrition plans and help your body create better and more realistic timelines as to like because of these things, you're going to have to be in this phase longer, or you'll have to reverse diet longer, or we really need to focus on more carbohydrates, or whatever that looks like. And even what like nutrients and foods are important to incorporate daily. Like there's certain nutrient deficiencies that are going to make it harder for you to have better progesterone levels or estrogen or metabolites of different things, right? So you can opt in for a supplement, or you can try and focus on more foods that have those certain vitamins and nutrients that we're looking for. So it really gives you so much information. And like if your practitioner knows how to read it and has good like nutrition understanding and exercise understanding, they'll be able to create a good plan for you. So now what I want to do is, like, we've touched on the 3 tests, the pros, the cons. What do you actually want to test? So Kirianna, I'll let you take this part away.
Okay, so as Steph said, we're going to touch on the hormones that we may want to test, hormones that are frequently tested, and what ways maybe we can test each of those hormones, or what might be like the best way to test each of those hormones. But first of all, this is not going to be an in-depth lesson on each hormone and each hormone imbalance. We are not going to go over the symptoms of each, just because, Steph, you've already done that in previous episodes of the podcast. So if you would like to learn more or listen more about the specific symptoms of imbalances for each hormone, or how they can affect the body in this perimenopausal, postmenopausal period, then go back to some specific episodes. I will name them right now for you to just get some more in-depth hormonal details. So episode 57 would be manipulating hormones to boost metabolism, is a great episode for this one. And then the other one would be episode 61, which is hormone imbalances affecting menopause fat loss. So those are 2 really good ones that will go more in depth with the hormones and then the hormone imbalances as well.
Okay, so we're going to dive into each individual hormone, like we said, very briefly here for you, because if we went over each one, I've tried to do it on a webinar before, like it would have been 3 hours. Like it was crazy. So we are going to touch on estrogen first and foremost. So estrogen, as many of you know, is a steroid hormone that is responsible for not only the development of female sexual characteristics, but also influencing the neuroendocrine, adipose, and vascular systems of the body. So there are 3 main forms of estrogen. There is estrone, which is our menopausal estrogen, estriol, which is end stage or pregnancy estrogen, and estridiol, which is your reproductive estrogen. So estridiol is the one that is most commonly used when we're testing estrogen. It directly stimulates the release of LH, your luteinizing hormone, from the pituitary gland. It affects your cholesterol synthesis, your bone health, your heart health, muscle health, your brain function, such as memory and food and mood. So you can see how that's very, very, very important. When it goes down, we start having issues with the hormonal symptoms. So estrogen can be tested in all manners. However, serum testing can be very limited due to fluctuations throughout the day. Urine metabolites testing, like the Dutch test that we talked about, is considered the gold standard, as it takes an average across all 4 to 5 testing times of the day, and then takes serum testing with a grain of salt then, because there are fluctuations throughout the day, right? So if you're getting your blood work, take it with a grain of salt. Okay, it's not like the be all end all, this is the absolute number. Dutch testing is going to be the gold standard, most accurate way to do this.
Okay, so next one is going to be progesterone. Of course, just briefly, the main role of progesterone in our reproductive years is to prepare the lining of the uterus, obviously for, a fertilized egg. Progesterone is primarily produced after ovulation. So first of all, if you're not ovulating, even though you're in reproductive years, which in perimenopause, we are usually not ovulating every single cycle anymore, that will affect progesterone levels, of course. So it can be a little bit harder serum-wise to know when to test this and or getting some accurate readings. So when we start going into this perimenopausal and then menopausal period, ovulation becomes more random and eventually stops. Progesterone production can switch to the adrenal glands in these lower levels to kind of make up our menopausal progesterone. Now there are actually 2 forms of progesterone metabolites as well, so we can't see that in serum testing. And it's really important to remember that progesterone is really important to test because it helps improve our mood. It's serving as an anti-anxiety hormone as well, so it helps bring a sense of calm and can help us sleep a lot more soundly. So it's really important to get some levels tested of progesterone, especially in peri and post-menopause, because we need to start figuring out where are progesterone levels. Yes, progesterone should be lower in post-menopause, but it should never be zero. We do still produce it within our adrenal glands. And it's also important to remember that we need to support our thyroid function with progesterone as well. So progesterone can be tested in all manners, serum, urinary, and saliva. However, that serum testing, so blood testing, can be limited just like estrogen due to fluctuations throughout the day. It will fluctuate pretty greatly throughout the day. We've seen that in a lot of research. Urine metabolite testing, so like the Dutch testing, is considered the gold standard for progesterone testing, as it does take an average across all 4 to 5 of those testing times throughout the day. It also can look at progesterone metabolites. So those 2 progesterone metabolites you don't see in your blood testing can give us insight into, which type of progesterone metabolite do we have higher levels of, because sometimes that can contribute more to like your anxiety or your mood or your sense of calm or anything like that as well. And on the Dutch test, progesterone can be measured in menopausal ranges, which makes it very easy for us to be able to see, well, what are your progesterone levels doing even in like post-menopause?
Yeah, and like the key thing I want to also like point out there for you all is that as progesterone decreases and we're not ovulating anymore, the main place that's produced is your adrenals. If we are in a stress state from under eating, over exercising, not sleeping, skipping meals, fasting, coffee on an empty stomach, being go, 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 dealing with life stresses, our body will prioritize producing cortisol in our adrenals and not progesterone, which then makes you feel more stressed, less grounded, you can't sleep, you don't feel relaxed, you're more reactive. So very important to make that key connection there. The next one is testosterone, which is our main androgen. That's typically considered like a male hormone, right? You hear testosterone, you think of men. And it is actually required for women. It helps with proper energy, your libido, your muscle growth, and maintaining your muscle mass, which we know is really hard because when estrogen starts to go down, that's one of the roles estrogen has, is to build and maintain muscle mass. So when estrogen goes down, testosterone kind of helps take over. But if testosterone goes down, then we have even worse issues with energy, libido, and being able to maintain muscle mass. Testosterone can be tested in all manners. It can be accurate with serum or Dutch testing. Dutch testing is going to look at both testosterone pathways. So if things are not adding up on the Dutch, we sometimes ask people to validate through serum testing for a more accurate picture.
Okay, so next hormone that you sometimes maybe can want to test, we'll talk a little bit about pros and cons for this, is something called our FSH. So this is called Follicle-Stimulating Hormone. It is a hormone that is produced to stimulate the ovaries to basically increase estrogen levels at the beginning of our cycle if we are menstruating. So FSH sometimes can fluctuate. It used to be considered like this quote unquote gold standard in blood testing to give us an indication of what stage of menopause women are in. However, now with further research, unfortunately, what we found is that FSH actually can fluctuate quite a bit throughout perimenopause and even in postmenopause for some women. So it's actually not a super accurate way for blood testing to see what stage of menopause we are unfortunately in. However, sometimes we can look more postmenopause than anything. We can confirm if you are in menopause. Let's say we have a lot of clients that have had partial hysterectomies, so they still have their ovaries, or they've had ablations, so they're not actually menstruating, so they actually don't know what stage of menopause they're in. We can sometimes look at FSH levels in the blood, because if they are consistently elevated to your usual standard testing is about 30. It's a micro international unit per milliliter, so we can write that somewhere if you want. But anything 30 or higher consistently, now this requires several tests, basically can show us if someone is in menopause or not. Again, it's not super accurate, but it is generally accepted that, you've reached menopause. You can only test your FSH with blood testing as of right now. And remember, you have to do this multiple times to actually get an accurate reading. So a single FSH test can actually be really misleading because estrogen production does not fall, just like estrogen, it does not fall at a steady rate. So estrogen and FSH will kind of fluctuate together. FSH levels can just like be even just throughout the day, hourly, again, just with the serum testing drawbacks we had talked about before, it can fluctuate quite a bit. So it's really important that if your doctor is going to use FSH testing in your blood to kind of help you determine where am I at in menopause, then make sure that you are doing that test several times for accuracy. So redoing your test just to make sure that it's actually valid is really important, because we could be testing one day with our blood and it's super high, and then we test the next time and it's like in the tank and it's super low. And you're like, okay, well, am I in menopause? Am I not in menopause? Like, I just need to figure this out for some people, because some people do want closure if they don't have a menstrual period anymore and they just don't really know what stage of menopause they're in.
So the next one is LH, which is your luteinizing hormone. It is another hormone that is produced again in the pituitary gland in your brain, and it really helps to regulate the length of your menstrual cycle and is an important signal for progesterone production to occur after the release of an egg at ovulation. It's inhibited by high estrogen levels. So if estrogen is high, LH is not there, it's inhibited, and it tends to rise during menopause as women's estrogen and progesterone levels start to go down. LH can be measured in younger years through urine, which is how we measure ovulation. However, for perimenopause, it's only accurate so far in blood, and it doesn't have a lot of accuracy for other hormone health markers. So that is something just to be aware of. People talk about FSH and LH often, but you can tell just from these two, like how we talked about them, they aren't actually great markers, and it's fairly disproven, a lot of the stuff that people used to think about it. So it's just something to be aware of when you're doing some research and reading, is how far back is this information coming from? Because that information is outdated now. Like, we know better, which is awesome.
Yeah. It's really great to have like all this research that's coming out and just being able to see that, okay, well, maybe these hormones fluctuate a lot more than we thought they did. So maybe they don't give us these accurate answers anymore that we thought. The next one that, so everyone talks about estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, even LH and FSH can be very common things to test. We're going to get into some other ones that actually are really important that are not really conventionally talked about as much. Just depends on the doctor you go to or like the kind of test you're getting done. However, DHEA and DHEA-S are hormones that are considered precursor hormones. I personally think, and we as, the team at Vitality and many people who test hormones do think that these hormones are very important to test. So they are considered precursor or like up the chain hormones that are extremely important in the production of almost all of our other sex hormones that we end up testing. So I always give this example in our Dutch test analysis. I like to think of DHEA and DHEA-S as kind of like flour for a baker, let's say. Just like a baker can make muffins or cookies or other different yummy things that are completely different with flour, DHEA is kind of very similar in the body, where it can go on to make testosterone. It can make that DHEA-S, which helps us make cortisol. It can help make progesterone. It can also help make other secondary androgens. And even further down the line of cycles with the hormone production, it can help us with estrogen production as well. So having imbalances of DHEA or DHEA-S can actually give us good insight into this up the chain kind of potential causes, or of like any of these hormone imbalances that you might be experiencing. So let's say, for example, we see on a serum blood test that your testosterone levels are super low. And you're like, oh my God, testosterone levels are low. Let me get some HRT and let me get on some testosterone, or let me do something to support testosterone. And we're not really feeling any better. And we actually have seen this several times with women where, we see this test on a serum test and we see this result. And so we slap a Band-Aid on it and we say, okay, testosterone's low. Testosterone's the problem. Let's give you more testosterone. However, it doesn't solve the problem. And then sometimes we go and get a Dutch test and we see that DHEA and DHEA-S is actually what's maybe the cause of this. And it's really low. And remember, it's just like that baker with the flour. Sometimes the testosterone or the face value hormone is like the chocolate chips of the cookie recipe, but like even if you put more chocolate chips in, it's not going to solve our problem if we don't have enough flour in the cookie recipe, right? So making sure that we can look at those up the chain hormones can actually be good ways to not only solve our face value problems. So for example, again, that testosterone at face value, it was actually maybe a DHEA problem. We just didn't have enough flour for a recipe. But it can also cover more bases. So typically when we see someone with low testosterone due to low DHEA, you're going to see low progesterone and low secondary androgens and potentially low cortisol at the same time, because DHEA is the flour for all of those recipes. So if we actually look at, the up the chain hormones and that DHEA, and we can solve that problem, we can actually probably fix multiple problems versus you taking estrogen and progesterone and testosterone HRT and still not feeling that great. So DHEA can only be measured in urine or saliva. DHEA-S, which is the free form of DHEA, can be measured with urine and blood testing. I like to see the Dutch testing versions of DHEA and DHEA-S because it actually gives us the pathway so we can look at, okay, are we sulfating? So the DHEA-S is a sulfated form of DHEA. That can give us insight into cortisol production and why our cortisol curve might be behaving the way that it's behaving. So again, just the full picture of everything can give us a lot more insight than just measuring the one hormone too. But DHEA-S is the only one that you can actually measure in the blood. Just like we had talked about before, some, serum testing doesn't actually measure those bound hormones and it only measures free hormones. And sometimes, for example, we can see DHEA actually is normal, but then DHEA-S is really low because there's inflammation blocking that sulfation. And so if we did a blood test and we saw that DHEA-S was low, we would be like, oh, well, that's our problem, when it really wasn't, because it was just a pathway problem that we detected on a Dutch test.
And I think this is really huge for people to understand, because I wish I had a visual I could show you guys right now. But if you look at the hormone pathway cycle, it's one thing can turn into this, can also turn into this, can also turn into this, and all the different conversions. So we end up taking HRT for a lot of things. This is why it doesn't help everyone, right? Because then everyone who took HRT would feel amazing. And that's not the case. So this is because you can put in something in your system, but you can't control what your body's going to do with it. Is it going to prioritize it to produce testosterone? Is it going to prioritize it to create one thing? Testosterone can get converted to different things. Estrogen can get converted to different things. Progesterone can get converted to different things. So it's understanding that yes, you can take this thing, but you can't control how your body's going to use it, which is a common misconception with HRT. And this is why some women, I find, especially with testosterone pellets, that seems to be the one that's the most, either it works well, or women are this is bad, I'm gaining weight even quicker, I'm feeling worse. And this is why. It's because that's not the actual problem. There's something else underneath, but we haven't done enough digging, or doctor hasn't done enough digging and things like that. So that is really important to understand. So the next one is your secondary androgens. These are also important in very small amounts to our bodies. So looking at these, again, can give us some insight into androgen dominance, even if testosterone is low. So secondary androgens can be very, very, very potent when found in imbalanced levels. So high stress or genetic factors can play a role in androgen dominant pathways over time. So that means your body is preferentially producing androgens instead of the hormones that we actually need to feel good. So again, this is where, are we solving the root problem instead of just tossing in Band-Aids? It's oh, we don't have enough of this, we need more of this. But why is this happening? So just like DHT, calaninone, who creates the names of these?
No, honestly, these ones are so hard. And I have to say them a lot because I do a lot of the Dutch testing, but it's very difficult to say these words. I don't know who makes up these names. I just go with the
acronyms. Yeah. I always just go by the acronyms because I'm honestly, you're not going to ask me to pronounce that in real world anyways. So things like DHT, which a lot of you know about, and androsterone are a few of the secondary androgens that we might want to be looking at that can give us some insight as to what's going on in your body. Some doctors can test some of these secondary androgens in blood, like DHT. However, as you all know, it's very rare to get a doctor to agree to test these hormones. Dutch testing will show you all 3 of these secondary androgens. Again, can provide you with so much insight, but again, you need to be able to look back up that chain, right? Like, where is the cell coming from? Do we have enough flour? Do we have all the ingredients that we need? So we can address the root cause. Because like I said, especially if I'm finding with a lot of women on calls that we talk to, they do okay-ish with some HRT. And then they change like the type, or like they go from like cream to like a pill, or they'll go from like nothing to like testosterone pellets. And like those seem to be like the big ones where it's like, I was doing okay and now I'm like super not. And it's because of these kinds of things, and we need to be aware of that, honestly.
Yeah. And it's just so important to know as much as you can all of these different hormones and all of these different levels, because they are all connected. And, example with the flour thing, just like a chocolate chip cookie recipe, if if you don't have a chocolate chip cookie that tastes very good, you need to go assess why. And if we're only looking at, well, how many chocolate chips did I put in? And we're not looking at, well, how much flour did we put in? Is there baking soda in it? Like, those are also really important aspects of a nice, like, balanced cookie recipe, basically.
Oh my gosh, one time, I remember I was in high school. I used salt instead of sugar.
No, Steph, did you eat it?
I had a bite and then I threw that stuff out.
Oh my gosh. And you know what? That's actually the perfect example, because that can happen with like our hormones too. And sometimes excessive stress can actually cause those pathways to like overproduce certain things, or just like instead of using sugar, you use salt by accident. Like your body can actually do that based on like the environment that you're in.
This is also why you have to taste test your cookie dough instead of wasting hours baking multiple dozens. And then you go to taste it and it is not okay.
I can't believe you didn't taste test it, to be honest with you, Steph. Like, that's like the main part of making cookies is eating the dough.
Yeah. Give me a break. I was like 15. Okay.
Okay. So next hormone that we really want you to try to get tested would be cortisol. So cortisol, of course, our main stress hormone. Steph, you talk about it all the time. We all know how important it is to have balanced levels of cortisol. And it is really important for some people to test cortisol to not only see their levels, but also see how their cortisol is actually behaving throughout the day. So again, high cortisol is not a bad thing. Chronically high cortisol for a long period of time and not having a proper cortisol response in the body is where things go wrong. So cortisol can be tested in the blood, but remember, it is supposed to fluctuate throughout the day a lot. So looking at the entire day's level will actually give you a better picture of what is actually going on instead of just one snapshot in time. So does it start low in the morning when you wake up like it should? Do you have that cortisol awakening response 2 hours after you wake up? Does it then go down in the afternoon again? Does it then go down at night? Or are we seeing levels not actually behaving properly throughout the day? We cannot see that on serum testing, but we can see it on a test where it is doing multiple readings throughout the day, right? Like a Dutch test, urine metabolite test. You can also get this tested with saliva testing. So if you are wanting to do that, again, as we talked about, just make sure the saliva testing that you're doing does come with multiple readings to make sure that you can get those levels throughout the day at specific times.
Exactly. And that's what happened to me. I was like, oh, I'm good. And then I took it throughout the day and I was like, no, we're not okay. But then it gives you a game plan. So you're good to go. And then a bonus is, while not a sex hormone, thyroid is an important part of the body's metabolism and hormone cycles. We ideally want to be testing all aspects of thyroid. So not just TSH. I had this conversation with a woman yesterday. You can have like indications of hypothyroidism can come from your T3 levels, your T4 levels, your reverse T3, thyroid antibodies. So getting a full picture as to like, is your body telling your thyroid to produce thyroid hormone? Is your thyroid hormone or thyroid actually producing that thyroid hormone? Is your body converting that thyroid hormone to a usable form? Or is it getting stored as fat? Or is the conversion just not happening? Is your body actually attacking your thyroid? All those things are going to influence how well your body functions and how you feel and how your thyroid actually works. So TSH is not enough. And it sucks because like I've been talking to one lady who's gone to 3 doctors who will not test her other thyroid hormones despite all of the symptoms and her history, which is freaking bonkers. So thyroid is going to be tested the best through blood. We can see all the possible indications of thyroid issues in the Dutch test. However, serum testing is the gold standard for this. So like it sucks, but like honestly, for a lot of women who want to get out the full thyroid panel, end up paying out of pocket at a blood testing facility because unfortunately a lot of doctors will not do it, which with the data and the research and how it's so prominent in women, especially once they're past perimenopause and menopause, the fact that we still have to fight so hard for this, I genuinely do not understand it because it is such a well-researched, well-known thing that I don't understand how it's not just part of how we do things. Lastly, before we wrap things up, it is important to remember that no testing is going to be 100%. I love Dutch testing. It's definitely my preferred option because it gives you the most information. But then I do need to take blood work to get my thyroid panel done, right? So nothing is ever going to be 100% comprehensive. So you might have to do a couple different things depending on what you need and like what your symptoms are, how you're feeling, what your struggles are, that kind of stuff. So you need to make sure that you're doing what is best for you regarding testing and what you actually want to get tested. We do Dutch testing here at Vitality. You don't have to be a client to get it done. You get your Dutch test. We send you the test. It goes to the lab. Lab will send us results as well as you results. Then you will look at it and be like, I don't know what any of this means because there's a lot of information on it. So then we will write a report for you. We will hop on a Zoom call with you, go over those results, explain what's actually happening in your body, what it all means, and then like recommended action plan. You'll also get a hormonal symptom assessment with us as well. So again, we can have a better idea as to like why and like what this is like indicating, what symptoms are coming from where, to help you address those root causes and then give you a game plan of like, this is kind of the emphasis we need to focus on. You need to incorporate this kind of food or these nutrients or whatever that looks like for you. Everyone's obviously going to be very different based on hormonal symptoms and their history and their test results. So if that's something that you're interested in, just like message me, let me know. I will help you figure that out. No problems. But Kirianna, is there anything that you want to say to like wrap things up?
No, I think we covered a lot today.
It was a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. I think it's really important to just make sure that you don't get, like you listening, that you don't get stuck on like one specific method being like the only method that you can take. Everyone has to make their own decisions on what they want to do for specific testing or even what hormones they want to get tested based off of either their doctor's recommendations or maybe what they've researched. And so making sure that you are doing things that, you know, you want to do and hopefully getting some answers that you want out of the testing is a really important part of this. And don't just get things done because someone maybe told you to do it. Like, go look into it, make sure that you're making the right decisions for you. And also understanding that like if your doctor's not going to do this stuff for you, maybe that is like the time that we do have to look elsewhere. And it is really unfortunate that we do have to do that if we're not able to take control of our health as much as we want to, like with our medical professionals that we have in our corner. But I think it's always something to make sure that you're looking into, and like the worst they'll say is no, and then you have an answer anyway, right? So don't ever be afraid to go and ask for the things that you want.
Yeah. And honestly, knowledge is power. Like the more information you have, the less you're guessing, right? Like for me, I find education and information so comforting because then it's like, hey, I know what the problem is. Now I can make a plan. As opposed, it's like, is it this? Is it that? Is what Stacy over there is doing going to help me? Or is it Mindy over there? Like it just, for me, it gives me such a peace of mind knowing that I'm not crazy, that these things are happening in my body. This is why. This is how we address it. So if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please let me know. Share this with all the ladies in your life who are struggling to figure out what the heck is going on in their body. We would super appreciate it. And have a good rest of your day. And Kirianna, go cuddle that beautiful new little puppy of yours.
I hope no one can hear him screaming in the background. So.
Okay, bye guys.